We're doing something a little bit different today. We don't usually focus on male directors in the podcast. However, we are doing a podcast today on Mulholland Drive, which was directed by David Lynch, who died about a month before we are recording. And while I have never been a huge David Lynch fan, I do appreciate his work. I appreciate what he always tried to do in film. And I think Tess is on the same page with that. She particularly loves Mulholland Drive. So we decided to do that film for the podcast today and dedicate it to David Lynch and to all the filmmakers out there who follow their muse and do what they believe to be artistic and creative and interesting, even when the rest of the world doesn't understand it.
Hello and welcome to Woman Inherits the Earth, a mother-daughter podcast about the representation of women in movies and television. I am Tessa Dare, a writer and the author of the paranormal mystery series The Karanzan Chronicles and Beth's daughter.
And I am Beth Von Baron, Tessa's mother and also a writer. In this podcast, we discuss women in film. Today, we are discussing Mulholland Drive, which was written and directed by David Lynch in 2001. He also did a lot of the music and the music design. It has a running time of 2 hours and 27 minutes. It's rated R, and it stars Naomi Watts, Laura Herring, Justin Theroux, who actually got top billing, which is kind of interesting, and we can probably talk about that. The music is by Angelo Badalamenti, and the director of photography is Peter Deming, and Tess will give you a plot summary.
We're not going to do a super in-depth plot summary for the movie because it's really difficult to do that, but I will read the brief IMDb summary. After a car wreck on Mulholland Drive renders a woman amnesiac, she and a Hollywood hopeful search for clues and answers across Los Angeles in a twisting venture beyond dreams and reality. Which I think is roughly a good summary of the film. I mean, you never want to give away the whole movie in a summary.
And actually, for such a complicated movie, that's actually pretty good. A pretty good summary.
Yeah, because it does mention the venture beyond dreams and reality. Mulholland Drive is a movie that kind of largely works on dream logic. It doesn't really have the same structure as a classical Hollywood narrative. I mean, the biggest thing to point out is that you can kind of split the movie in two. And I guess I will say, as much as we're not going to summarize the movie, if you haven't seen it before, you should probably turn this off and go watch it yourself. Yeah. I think that Absolutely. It is a movie that needs to be experienced to be understood. No one can really explain it to you unless you have seen it. But that being said, we are going to talk about it, and I think it's better for you to see this movie without having somebody else's preconceived notions already swimming around in your head, because the movie is a lot about interpretation. And I'm going to read a quote from Lynch on that in a moment. But what I was going to say is you can largely split the movie in two. There's kind of the first 2/3/3/4 of the movie, and then the final.
I think it's probably 90%.
Yeah. Most of the movie is kind of one thing, and then there's a sudden shift, and then all of a sudden we sort of get a different version of the story. And there's a ton of debate about how to interpret Mulholland Drive. There has been from the moment it came out. And Lynch was famous for refusing to interpret his movies for people, especially this one, because this is kind of one of the more confusing ones. I mean, a number of them are confusing. I would say probably the piece of David Lynch's that most people are familiar with is Twin Peaks, which is actually relatively straightforward compared to some of his other work, because it is largely a murder mystery, at least on the bare bones of it. It's more complicated than that. It's about a lot more than that. And it's definitely also, like a lot of his work, kind of in conversation with genre itself.
Yeah.
Twin Peaks in particular is in conversation with kind of the over-the-top soap operas of the late 80s. A lot of it is about this small town that has these like patriarchal men that kind of control what's going on.
Have you ever seen it?
Yeah, I have. I haven't seen all of Twin Peaks. I've seen the first season.
You only need to see the first year. Yeah, the first season. I mean, it kind of goes downhill after that.
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, David Lynch was only a part of the first season. Well, of the so there's actually technically 3 different things that are Twin Peaks. There's the original show, which lasted for 2 seasons, but David Lynch was only really involved in the first season, and then he left to go work on another movie. I think he left to go work on Blue Velvet. And he said when he came back, they had kind of twisted it into something that he found unrecognizable and boring. He thought that they went a really boring route with it.
Totally.
He later on had another chance to kind of revisit the world, and he made a prequel movie called Fire Walk With Me. But that one, I think, is more in conversation with thrillers and the way that thrillers kind of treat women. He definitely, a number of his works have, if not a like overtly feminist bent, at least an interest in kind of interrogating the way that film deals with gender. And then there was, in I think 2017, a sort of revival series called Twin Peaks: The Return, which I also haven't seen yet, but I am planning to.
And another interesting thing that connects these two and his other films too is that he is one of those directors, kind of like Woody Allen, and there's somebody else too. Well, Mallrats.
Oh, Kevin Smith.
That he tend to work with troops of actors. And Lynch definitely works with Kyle MacLachlan a lot, and some other actors. He uses the same actors over and over again, and does it well. They don't. It's not like they're doing the same character every time, but I enjoy that when a director likes to work with the same actors. I think it does make the films better.
And when those actors also want to go back and work with that director, I think it speaks well to how he treats them. Yeah, and especially when it comes to David Lynch,
actors have said that it was a real treat to work with him.
Yeah, I know Naomi Watts, the star of this film in particular, really felt indebted to him. She's talked about how in the lead up to this film, she had come to Los Angeles to be an actor, and she kept auditioning and not having any luck. And then he cast her in this, and it really kind of started her career. It was really her breakout role.
And she really does shine in this too.
She's fantastic in this, yeah.
And a month ago when he died, she released a video message that I saw on Instagram, and she was devastated by the loss. And they all knew he was dying, but she was still, it was a personal, close loss to her.
And he was a lifelong smoker, and I believe he had emphysema. That is my understanding.
Yeah, COPD, yeah.
And kind of an interesting moment of poetry, he apparently died while meditating.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. He was such a constant, or such a long time smoker. Most of the photographs that you see of him have him smoking.
Yep.
Because he was known for that. And actually, in this movie, the director on set is often smoking.
Is
and
also
this
smoking,
is 2001, and I think by then most films were not allowing the actors and directors to smoke on the set. But this guy is, because Lynch did probably till the very last work he did. So
I think now is probably as good a time as any for me to read the quote that I wanted to read.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So this is from the Criterion Collection's website, and I'll include a link in the show description. It's an interview with David Lynch, and they're specifically talking about Mulholland Drive. And the interviewer said, "Audiences have struggled with trying to work the movie out, and at a certain point, they just want you to tell them what it all means to you." And Lynch's response was, "Yeah, and I always say the same thing. I think they really know for themselves what it's about. I think that intuition, the detective in us, puts things together in a way that makes sense for us. They say intuition gives you an inner knowing, but the weird thing about inner knowing is that it's really hard to communicate that to someone else. As soon as you try, you realize that you don't have the words or the ability to say that inner knowing to your friend, but you still know it. It's really frustrating. I think you can't communicate it because the knowing is too beautifully abstract. And yet poets can catch an abstraction in words and give you a feeling that you can't get any other way. I think people know what Mulholland Drive is to them, but they don't trust it. They want to have someone else tell them. I love people analyzing it. I love people analyzing it, but they don't need me to help them out. That's the beautiful thing, to figure things out as a detective. Telling them robs them of the joy of thinking it through and feeling it through and coming to a conclusion." And then the interviewer asks, "And it doesn't matter if that conclusion isn't the same as yours?" Right, because even if you get the whole thing, there would still be some abstract elements in it that you'd have to kind of think. You'd have to say, "I kind of understand that, but I don't know exactly what it is." Sort of. The frames are always the same on the film. It's always the same length, and the same soundtrack is always running along it, but the experience in the room changes depending on the audience. That's another reason why people shouldn't be told too much, because knowing putrefies that experience.
Well, and I have 2 follow-up comments on that immediately that I was taking notes on as you were reading it. Art is always in the eye of the beholder. No matter what the artist puts down on a, in a painting or in a song, the person who's looking at it or listening to it is going to take something else away from it. Maybe what the artist intended, maybe not. But that's the beauty of art. Art is an experience. It's not just... It's a creation, but it's also an experience. So that's one thing. But the other thing is his comment about abstraction. Unless they create in abstraction, some the people who create in it are comfortable with it. But the rest of us who have more concrete brains and want to understand and want to know what the meaning is, those of us who care about these kinds of things, because a lot of people don't, but it's hard for us. I will tell you about my first experience watching this movie, and I couldn't tell you when it was, but I saw it at some point, and I remember thinking when the flip happens, and you get a different kind of take on the story, and we'll get to that in a little bit, but I remember thinking when it was over that I liked the second story better. And because it was a little bit more real, it was a little darker, and the characters just seemed real to me and not so... Well, let's just take Peggy. Is that her name?
Her name is Betty in the first part, but in the second part it's Diane.
Betty is this... almost unreal 1950s personality, bubbly, loves everybody, thinks is very hopeful and
naive.
Very naive, yeah. And she is, for the most part, really hard to believe, except for when she's doing the scene.
Yeah.
She's practicing the scene before she goes to do her audition.
Yeah.
She does the scene twice. She reads the scene with Rita. At this point, she's Rita. All of a sudden, Betty comes alive. I mean, you see her as a real, she's just this real dynamic person, and she's a really good actress too. I mean, you can tell that this is her wanting to be an actor. It's not just a dream. She's really good at it. But then when she goes to the audition and does that same scene with the actor who would be in the movie with her, it's a completely different interpretation.
Yeah.
And it was just so astonishing in both cases. This is not the Betty. This is kind of a foreshadowing, because this is not the Betty that we know up to this point in the film. But anyway,
for sure.
So Betty is just a little Pollyanna-ish, I think is what I'm looking for.
When she does the scene the second time, the Pollyanna is gone. It's like a very...
It's gone.
Sexual,
it's gone the first time, dark, too.
Yeah.
It's very, but it's very sexualized the second time.
Yeah.
Right. The first time, it's very intense and dynamic, and you completely understand it. And then the second time is with a man.
A much older man.
And it's very sexualized.
Yeah.
So, but it's just a completely different way to play the scene, and it's the same words. It's the same scene.
That's also a really good example of how great Naomi Watts is in this film. I think it's very easy to overlook because she spends so much of the film as the Pollyanna version of Betty.
Yeah.
But she does that version, she does that scene in those two different ways, and then she does a totally different character, basically, in the final part of the film. And she's fantastic at all of them.
She is playing 4 different people.
And
in the beginning, when this Pollyanna stuff, it's like, but when you see her do this, when she's rehearsing the scene with Rita, it's like, wow, she's a really good actor. And then you see her do it different. Anyway, so all 3, I just came away from this being a huge Naomi Watts fan. And I hadn't she's really not done a lot of work. I mean, when you look at the careers of women who are about her age, mid-50s, they've done a lot more work than she has. And I mean, if you look at her IMDb page, it's not very long, which I'm surprised at, because she's a really damn good actor. I'm just really
and I
surprised.
think that kind of speaks to what I think is part of the point of this film, which is that I think a lot of this movie is about Hollywood and the random chance of success or failure in Hollywood. I think one of the big things that I always take away from this movie is it's not just about talent. You can be the most talented actor in the world, and if you don't end up in the right rooms, you'll just never have success. And I think that's kind of part of what's going on with the two different parts of the film. The common interpretation, generally speaking, of Mulholland Drive is that the final part of the film is reality, and everything leading up to that is either a dream. Or Betty's preferred version of how it had gone, Betty's idea of how it was supposed to be. I think that's a little too simplistic, in part because there are a number of things that happen in the first part that have nothing to do with Betty, so she can't be imagining all of it. But I think that both parts are a commentary on our cultural conception of Hollywood and the reality of Hollywood. I think a lot of the first part of the film
in Los Angeles.
Yeah. The Betty in the first part of the movie is this naive, hopeful person who is also at the beginning of her career, and based on the way things are going, we feel as the audience that she's probably going to be successful. Like, she has that meeting and the right people are there, and the female casting director takes an interest in her because she happens to be in the room and then wants to introduce her to all these people. But then Betty/Diane, as she is in the end of the film, it's not really implied that Diane is untalented. She seems like she's probably just as talented as the Betty version of herself, but she's just not lucky. She just isn't in the right rooms. She isn't invited in. And that kind of makes all the difference. And I think that the juxtaposition of the two, the first one is it's also, I guess, kind of about the concept of the American dream, right? We all have this idea, like going to Hollywood and making it as a star is kind of the most fantastical version of the idea. But there's this idea that if you just have talent and work really hard, then whatever you want to do, it'll happen for you and it'll be magical. But the truth is, not just in Hollywood, but in a number of industries, just especially in Hollywood, a lot of it is luck. A lot of it is whether you are invited in.
It's opportunity. So we have this idea of the great, the American dream, that if you just work hard, things will fall in line for you. And that's not necessarily true if you don't have opportunity. So, and that's what a lot of people don't understand about, the concept of equity. It's opportunity. A lot of our systems are unfair. Breaking through those unfair systems is really difficult to do in competitive situations like, the movie making industry.
The thing that I think a lot of people, or it takes a long time for people to realize, is there is a lot of talent in the world. Hollywood is full of talented actors, directors, writers who can't get hired. There is so much talent out there, and for various reasons, a lot of talented people don't end up with what we would consider success.
And actually, I just saw a snippet of an interview with Robert Redford. This is why he founded his Sundance Institute. Back in, I don't know, the 90s, maybe 80s, 90s, I'm not sure when he founded it, but he saw all these young people who were talented, not just actors, but writers and directors and cinematographers and people who were not getting hired. And he wanted to make sure that those people had opportunity. So he set up this Sundance Institute that promotes and supports young filmmakers. He wasn't sure it was going to be successful. He bought this land in Utah and figured, oh, it's a crapshoot, let's give it a shot. And he was able to, he funded a lot of it in the beginning himself, but then got, donations from other people and developed the foundation. And at this point, I believe they produce, or they support the filmmaking efforts of 10 people every year. So 10 films. But then they also have this film festival that they make a lot of money off of to help support those filmmakers. So he had the same idea that there's just all this talent going to waste. He was this beautiful, suave actor and popular, and he decided that there was a bigger piece to this. And bless his heart. Anyway, so back to the movie. I just want to talk a minute about my reactions to this film the first time I saw it. I mean, we're talking about people not comfortable with abstraction. I am one of those people. I try to force myself to be comfortable with it, but it's a hard thing to do. And as I've grown older, I've come to love abstract visual art, paintings and stuff. Didn't like it at all when I was younger, but I have come to like it a lot more now because I realize that you don't have to understand every piece of it. You just have to have a feeling for it and what it makes you think, what it makes you feel. So when I first saw this film, I was really bored in the first part of the film. I mean, and then it kind of got into being a little bit of a murder mystery. I think Lynch likes that. He likes to throw a murder mystery in, and he's definitely has done that here. Or not a murder mystery, but it's definitely a mystery.
I think he likes a seedy underbelly.
Yeah, okay, he does do that. But there's a mystery here, and it finally grabbed me. There was enough storytelling involved. And that's a problem a lot of times with that abstraction. I really like storytelling, and you don't always get get that in the kind of form that I want anyway. And in this film, it takes a while to kick in. There's a lot of different things that happen in the first 20 minutes, and they're different stories.
Yeah.
And but then it becomes Betty's story. But it takes a while for that story to really become something dynamic that you want to understand. And just about the time you're really getting into it, they flip the story, and you get a completely different story with the same characters. And I mean completely different story with the same characters, to the point where Ann Miller's character is the director's mother. So I was just getting to like it. And then they flipped the story. And if the story had been that last 10 to 20%, the entire movie, I would have enjoyed that as a movie, because it was a little bit darker, a little bit edgier. But the flip at that point, it wasn't even halfway through. It was literally almost at the end of the movie, like 20 minutes left in the movie. And I liked both parts of it, but I couldn't understand. The only way I could understand it was, well, it's a different interpretation of the same story. That's all I could come up with. And it wasn't until I was preparing for this podcast that I read some things. And there's all these ideas out there, suggestions by critics that it's, that the first part is dream. And there are clues about that, and how the pink bed scene where, you can hear heavy breathing in the beginning. And that's where she's laying down to go to sleep. And then everything from there until the story flips is a dream. And that would work. It works for people who need to understand and put it in concrete terms. That will work. But it also works any number of other ways.
Yeah. So when I first watched it, I think I was in high school, and I don't even remember why I specifically wanted to watch this movie. I feel like it literally might have been just Dad took us to a video store, and I liked the picture, and I picked it up and watched it. Like, I literally, I don't think I knew who David Lynch was. I just found this movie out of all of the movies and was like, I'm gonna watch this. And I did. And it didn't change my life, but it changed how I looked at movies. I feel like it was the first movie that I'd ever seen where I was like, oh, movies can do this. Movies can do whatever this is, where the story is not straightforward. And what I felt about it at the time was that I felt like I could understand it in parts. Like, each individual scene made sense to me, but I wasn't entirely sure what the whole was. And I feel like to a certain extent, I still feel that way somewhat intentionally. I feel like I resist there being a singular explanation for this movie, because I feel like that limits it too much.
Yeah, I agree completely. And by the way, you were 13 when it came out, so I'm not sure when you saw it, but you were a pretty young teen at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I saw it at 13. I think I was in high school when I saw it, but I do think that it was not like an old movie. I definitely think I saw it before I went to college. I vaguely remember watching it at Dad's apartment, which implies around that time period.
Yeah, which is interesting, because I cannot remember when I first saw it, but it was not right when it first came out. I think it was a few years later. Maybe you came home and told me about it, and I checked it out and watched it. That's a real possibility. Oh, and let me just stop here a second and say, a lot of the critics say it's a surreal film. I'm not sure that's the right word. I think there's some abstraction to it. I'm not sure it's surreal. There's some scenes in it that are surreal. Yeah. Like the short guy in the wheelchair behind the sound. There's like a sound thing that these guys come in and talk to him, and there's a window, and he's sitting in this what looks to be a staged area, but it's him and one guy, and he's in the wheelchair. That actor, by the way, does have a role in Twin Peaks. It's kind of a weird role. I can't remember. I haven't seen Twin Peaks in a long time. That's kind of surreal, I guess you could say. I don't know.
You're talking about this sort of, oh God, it's so hard to describe. It's sort of feels like a back room or something.
I've got his name here somewhere. Rogue or something.
He might play if it's who I'm thinking of, I think he plays the guy who only appears in the dreamscape on Twin Peaks and speaks backwards.
Yes. And he's always laughing.
Yeah, Mr. Roke.
That's all I remember.
He does a weird dance, and all of his dialogue is played backwards.
That sounds familiar. And again, I haven't seen it in a long time. That might be something we should do at some point, is watch the Twin Peaks series and talk a little bit about it. But there are a lot of ideas. Even if you can't see the film as this linear, it's not the Deer Hunter. And the reason I mentioned that is I was just reading about the Deer Hunter today. It's not one of those kind of films. It's not even Apocalypse Now, which, despite its surreal elements, has a linear story and literally a journey. So I wouldn't call it surreal. I mean, maybe I'm not even sure what surreal means. I guess I should have looked that up. But I think it's a word that people throw things into when they don't understand stuff. Oh, it's surreal. It's surreal.
Yeah.
There are a lot of surreal writers out there who write novels. And magical realism is so surreal to me is I don't know. It's a wrong term here. There is some linear storytelling to this. It's just that some things happen. You see them. It's not that they happen, but we see them happen out of order, out of time sequence. But you can step back from it and say, oh yeah, but they were just, that's a a flashback or whatever. You can tell that these things they're showing them to us out of order, but that doesn't mean they happened out of order. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it doesn't follow the sequence of most films where there's like a very logical progression from scene to scene.
Yeah.
It follows more of a dream logic where things kind of seem like they happen in a somewhat random order or are connected through arbitrary minor details as opposed to following a linear sequence.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. So I think there are some ideas in here, though, that even though it's not what most people would consider a linear story, there are a lot of interesting ideas in here and scenes, a lot of interesting scenes. There are a lot of mystery men.
Yes. Yeah, actually, I want to talk about that too.
Did you notice that? Yeah, okay. So let's talk about the mystery men.
I kind of want to connect that a little bit to what we were talking about earlier about our concept of Hollywood. Because I do feel like the mystery men are a little bit related to the gendered aspect of that, because a lot of what the mystery men do is basically like meet up in these weird liminal spaces and decide what is going to happen to other people. In particular, in the main part of the movie, there's a through line where they're trying to pressure the director to hire a very specific actress. We don't know why. The director really does not like this, and the scene where it is introduced to him is really bizarre and has these like two men show up. One of them is like barking this order at them, and the other one barely says anything, asks for an espresso, and then spits it into a napkin. It's like this really weird scene where these older white men in suits show up and make demands and then retreat to their secret cabal where they make these decisions.
Well, and those two men are, I think we're supposed to think that they are Italian gangsters.
Yeah, that's sort of the vibe. Yeah.
Mafia. They're kind of mob, yeah. So those are the two of the sets of mystery men. Yeah, that's one set, yeah.
It is a surreal version of it, but that's not that different from what really happens in Hollywood.
What really happens?
There are these secret cabals of men who make all of the behind-the-scenes decisions, and we don't really know why. They have their reasons.
Did Harvey Weinstein come to mind for you? Because that's what kept coming up for me. Yeah. He made these decisions, and he told the directors, I'm sure he made directors hire certain actors and actresses. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And they treat women more like they are a commodity than like they are people with their own minds and ambitions, They make all the decisions, and nobody else gets a say.
Yeah. And there's another set of mystery men in the diner. We have no idea why they're meeting. We don't know who they are.
We never know.
There is no description of why they're meeting. They seem to know each other. And the older guy, the younger actor is a really famous character actor. I don't know his name, but I've seen him in a dozen things. He's got an odd look to him.
Yeah, he's got a very specific
he's a good
look.
Actor.
Patrick Fischler.
There you go. And he describes why he wanted to meet him at that diner, that specific diner. And then he tells them it's a dream. And then he goes outside and wants to show them where the dream happens. And then the monster, quote unquote, in the dream who always kills him does in fact kind of jump out at him and cause him to faint. Now I think the assumption is that he's had a heart attack and died. So the monster has actually killed him. We have no idea what relevance to the film this is. We kind of later on do, but it's never really distinct or clear. So there's a second set of mystery men.
And that's kind of, in my opinion, that's kind of the most dreamlike part of the film, because it feels exactly like how a dream would play out. Like in the dream, you're talking about how you've had this dream before, and you're trying to explain it to someone, and they don't get it, and then the dream that you remember having starts to play out before your eyes. That is one of the most fascinating scenes in the film to me, in part because when I saw it, I was like, I've had this dream. I know exactly what this dream is.
And yet, it is so normal. The
Yeah.
whole tone of the scene is very normal. It looks
Yeah.
like it's been taken right out of one of the cop shows that was on, in the 90s and 2000s
Mm-hmm.
for forever. And it's like, it feels so normal. They're just having a conversation. They're sitting in a diner. They're drinking coffee, which is a big thing in Lynch TV shows and movies, the coffee. But they're in a diner, and it's just normal. And yet we have
Mm-hmm.
no idea why they're there, who they are, why they're meeting. It's so
What
funny.
they have to do with the rest of the film, unclear.
Nothing. It has nothing to do. And yet it's a fascinating scene. I mean, I rewound it and rewatched it because it was just so. It's a perfectly filmed scene. Yeah. I mean, and they build up the tension. They kind of, I don't know. I can't even describe it, but it's great filming. And,
it is.
And then,
it's fantastic.
And then he dies.
Maybe he just faints, or maybe he wakes up. Maybe he wakes up.
Yeah. And a third set of mystery men happens at the very beginning of the film when they're riding in the car. Rita, who at this point we don't know her name.
Oh yeah.
And we don't know that she's an actress. We don't know anything about her. But she's in a car accident, and that's what starts, the whole film. Yeah. At least that part of the film. And there are two mystery men in the car with her. And it looks like she is I think we're supposed to believe that she's being kidnapped.
She got in the car with them intentionally, but then they pull a gun on her. And then
they pull a gun on her.
The car accident kind of saves her life. Like it looks like they're going to execute her on the side of the road, but then another car comes and slams into their car, and then she's able to get away.
By the end of the film, we understand that actually, some of it happened because she was killed. She was murdered by Betty. Or Betty hired somebody to murder her.
Or Diane.
Yeah, Diane. Excuse me. She will be Betty. It's hard for me to go back and forth with names. But Betty
Diane
hired somebody to murder her, not just because she was a jilted lover, because they were lovers, but also because Rita, and what is her name?
Camilla.
Rita Camilla has kind of destroyed Betty Diane's career and prevented her from. She's one of the reasons why Diane isn't getting roles. So there's a lot of reasons for her, and she's gone a little crazy.
Yeah, I mean it's sort of unclear. Maybe she's destroyed her career, or maybe it's just that she has had the success that Betty/Diane has not been able to have. And this actually kind of gets to something that I wanted to talk about, which is dualities. There's kind of this recurring thing in the film, especially with the switch where everybody is suddenly playing a different role, where each person has kind of another person who is like a reflection of them. And in particular, Betty/Diane and Rita/Camilla are kind of mirrors of each other both times. And this gets like visually very clear towards the end of the first chunk of the movie when Rita puts on a blonde wig and becomes visually almost indistinguishable from Betty. In the final part of the film where everything's flipped, the duality there kind of seems to be that Camilla has all of the success and all of the luck, and Diane has none of it. And they are lovers in both parts of the film. In the second part of the film, they're like ex-lovers. Although even the second part of the film plays around a little bit with time, and there's kind of a scene where they're together, but then it cuts in such a way that implies that actually this is just Diane remembering them being together. Yeah. And that there's a lot of resentment, particularly Diane resenting Camilla both for leaving her and for having this success that she hasn't had. And also Camilla kind of flaunts it. She keeps inviting Diane to things, but it seems to be like she's inviting her in order to
be humiliated.
Yeah,
she's
exactly.
Humiliated at the table.
Yeah. And there's even when she invites her to the big party, it turns out that that's so that she can announce her engagement to the director. And then at that party, she kisses another woman right in front of everybody and right in front of Diane. So it's like, it's not even just that she's, marrying this other guy. It's also she's moved on to another female lover as well, who apparently her new director fiance is totally fine with, because she can just kiss her in public.
And this treatment of Diane, this short story showing this treatment of her, kind of supports the idea of the first 2/3 of the film being a dream, because in the dream it's perfect. She saves Rita, she protects her, she makes it her mission to help Rita figure out who she is and what happened. And she's very protective of her, almost like a motherly protection of her until they become sexually involved. And that is, you can see how people who think that that's a dream sequence, that would support that, because in her mind, she did all this. She helped Camilla get to this point.
Yeah.
And how is she treating her? It's not fair.
Yeah, you could also see it as like in the dream, their roles are reversed. In the final part of the film, Camilla has all the power. She could probably pull some strings for Diane and get her more, but she chooses not to. But in the dream, when the roles are reversed and Diane/Betty in this part has all the power, she does everything she can to help her. She protects her. She keeps her in her home. Yes. It's kind of this like, well, if the roles were reversed, I would do the right thing, but you're not doing it.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Another kind of odd idea in the film is that there are false expectations set up a lot of times, and that's the Hollywood dream. False expectations. You're going to go out there and you're going to make it big as an actor or as a director or as a writer or a cinematographer or just anything, but in the very beginning, well, it's not the very beginning because we don't actually see Betty for I think the first 15-20 minutes, but when we do see her, she is walking out of the airport with this older woman on her arm, and we think it must be her grandmother. I mean, because they are so affectionate and with each other, and they seem to know each other really well, and then they don't know each other at all. They say goodbye, and they just met on the plane. And everybody who's ever flown on a plane is looking at that scene and thinking, no. It doesn't happen. You do not make friends. The people who say they've met their spouse on a plane and fallen instantly in love and they're together for the rest of that happens. That does not happen. It's a lie. The people you meet on planes are just usually very difficult people in a very difficult situation. And so this is definitely a dreamy interpretation of what it's like to fly.
And it feels like it's sort of a microcosm of the whole Hollywood dream, right? Because it's like Betty is so blessed and lovable that these random strangers just immediately start caring for her. And at the end of that scene, she turns around and thinks that she's lost her bags, but it turns out that a cabbie has just voluntarily already put them in the cab for her. Like, everyone is so nice and welcoming.
Everybody's helpful. Yeah.
And it's
everything's going to be wonderful for her. Yeah. And then we'll get to when we see the grandmother and grandfather again later on. It's very weird. That is the weird part of the movie. And yet it actually still does make a lot of sense to me. That actually was perfect. So another scene is where Billy Ray Cyrus, and it's funny because the director is walking into his home after being told at that meeting that he has to do what these gangsters want him to do. And he gets home and he walks into this beautiful home. It's all glass and it overlooks the ocean, and he's got a great car. He's got a Porsche or something. And he's walking in and he finds his wife in bed with another man. And the first thing out of my mouth was, that's Billy Ray Cyrus. There are a lot of cameos in this movie, and that's one of them. So he's in bed with Lorraine. I wrote down her name. What we expected to have happen, because the director has left the meeting with these gangsters who are scary and have basically threatened him. And he drives home. He gets out of his car. It takes a long time to walk in, and he's looking around the house, and it's like he doesn't understand what's going on, that there's something off. And so my feeling was, oh, the gangsters have sent somebody to kill him, and they're going to kill him. And instead, he walks into the bedroom, and his wife is with Billy Ray Cyrus. So
one of the weird things about that scene is he has, in the moment, a very understated reaction, but she gets really mad. Like, she's pissed at him for coming home and catching her. Like,
yes! What are you doing here? I'm supposed to be able to get away with this.
Yeah. I think she even says something like, you ruined everything. And it's like,
you ruined everything. Oh, my God. Oh, and there's a truck in the driveway. That's the other thing. So he drives up, and there's a truck in the driveway. And it's not a new, it's like a working man's truck. It's old. And so that adds to the idea that, there's somebody in there about to do him harm. And there is, but it's not in the way you're thinking. So it's like a false expectation. And the other thing is that when Betty comes into her aunt's house, so the scene, let's just give this a backup a little bit here. But when Rita has her accident, she climbs, it's on Mulholland Drive, which is one of the most famous, one of the 2 or 3 most famous streets in Los Angeles. Everybody in the country knows about Mulholland Drive, like Sunset Boulevard.
It's famous in part because it's this like winding, twisting road that's like kind of dangerous to drive on, but it's also very like dangerous. it goes really high up, so it's got these beautiful views of the city.
And so she's had this accident. She walks down the hill, and I don't know about you, but I'm sitting here watching this thinking she's got her purse on her shoulder. She remembered to grab her purse, even though she's dazed and confused.
See, I was thinking
and
she's still wearing her heels and she's going to break her ankle.
Yeah, and she's wearing her heels and she's going to walk down this forested steep hill instead of just walking down the street. But then later on we realize it's because she thought she was still in danger. You know, there's brush and there's trees, and she's walking down this and never falls. Gets down to the end of the street. Anyway, so she finally she's running across the street and she finds this house and she falls asleep under some bushes because she's probably got a concussion.
Yeah.
The reason they had the concussion is that they were parked on one of the dangerous curves on Mulholland Drive where they were going to get her out and kill her, and an oncoming car, two cars are racing and in the oncoming lanes, and one of them hits them and kills the two murderers. She somehow survives. Anyway, she ends up at this house that's actually an apartment. It's not a house, but it's a courtyard apartment, so it looks like it's a structure. And there are bushes out in front. She falls asleep under that. And then in the morning she wakes up, and the woman who owns the apartment or rents the apartment, lives there, is leaving and has a lot of luggage. So it's obviously she's going to be gone for a while. So Rita sneaks inside and hides under the table, and the woman forgets something and has to come back in to get her keys. She comes back in to get her keys so she can give them to the apartment manager to give them to her niece, Betty, when she arrives. So they're in this kitchen, and you're absolutely certain there's no way this woman could have walked back into her kitchen and not seen Rita under the table.
Yeah.
But she doesn't. So then time goes by, other things happen, and Betty arrives at the apartment. And it is managed by the actress, the character played by the actress Ann Miller, who has a long history of Broadway musicals and movies that have music in them. She's a singer-dancer. Ann Miller made her living mostly as a dancer and a singer in musicals. And I have a local story about that very quickly. She was in a production at the Municipal Opera here in St. Louis. We call it the Muni. It's an outdoor theater in Forest Park. I want to say in the 70s or 80s. And she was hit by a boom. Or no, it was a falling curtain I don't know, something fell on her and seriously injured her. I mean, she almost died. And she wasn't able to dance ever again.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, and the Muni Opera is owned by the city of St. Louis. She had a huge lawsuit against the city. I mean, it really was their fault, not the city's, but it was the fault of whoever was operating. And I want to say it was a boom, but it was something that like a curtain that would come down, and you needed to be out of the way. And she was under it, and I don't know how it happened. You could probably look it up. So Ann Miller is a name I've been familiar with since I was a teenager because of this happening. So anyway, Betty arrives and she gives her the keys, and they walk into the apartment, and they're walking through the apartment, and we'll talk about the apartment in a minute because you and I both had similar reactions to it, but they don't see her under the table. And my expectation is they're going to find her, and that's, what's going to happen. But instead, they don't find her. The landlady leaves, and Betty continues to walk around the apartment and look at it. And it is beautiful. It
gorgeous.
It's Art Deco, completely preserved. It's just beautiful. It's gorgeous. And, and it's got just this old Hollywood feel to it. It's Art Deco. And so she walks into the bedroom, and there's a robe on the bed, and she assumes that her aunt has left this robe for her. And then she walks into the bathroom, and there's steam coming out of the shower. So she goes over and opens it, and there's a naked woman in there. So and it's Rita. So and that's where they first meet. And again, the expectation is she's going to be under the table, and she's going to be asleep, and she's going to find her there, and she does, and she's in the shower.
Well, and the scene where she's hiding under the table also feels very much like dream logic to me. Like that feels like a moment in a dream where in reality this shouldn't hide you at all, but somehow in the dream it works. I also just wanted to say that like Ann Miller's character Coco, I love Coco. She's so fun.
She's
got
wonderful.
Crazy makeup on, like very extreme makeup. I mean, it doesn't look bad, but it's like it's a lot. She looks a little bit like a drag queen, and she's just very like in command. Like the first thing that we like hear her say is like Betty's coming into the courtyard, and Coco sees some like dog poop on the floor, and she like immediately yells up at the guy who owns the dog and is like, "You need to take care of this." She's just very in charge, and she's also got a little bit of a kind of mothering presence to Diane. I think,
She
sorry, to
does.
Betty. And I think, again, it's kind of one of those, like, she's like a fantasy character. It's like you want to move into this beautiful apartment that has this really cool landlord who really takes care of stuff, but is also really nice. Like, she's simultaneously like in charge and will take no shit, but also kind and wants what's best for you.
It's what you would want in a landlord or landlady.
Exactly.
And it's just, she's perfect. She's witty and sarcastic.
And like knowledgeable. She's been there for years.
Knowledgeable, yeah. But the makeup is intense. She's, straight out of the 1940s, 50s kind of look. But she kind of reminds me of those dame type characters from 40s and 50s movies.
And she has the vibe of like having been an old Hollywood actress. Like that's very much what it feels like. Yeah,
that's definitely what it feels like. And just while we're on the apartment complex, these old courtyard-based apartment complexes. There's got to be a better word for it, but you see them in TV shows and movies all the time. And from what I understand, there are still quite a few of those in existence, but they're getting torn down because of gentrification in these neighborhoods. And it's a real shame because they're beautiful.
What we're describing is there's a big shared space in the middle, a shared like garden courtyard space.
Yeah.
I did watch a video about this, that it was really common to build spaces like this, especially in Los Angeles in like the 1920s and 1930s. And it's really not common anymore because, no one's paying for that space. So technically that's space that you could be making more money off of.
Right. Yeah. And it continued because there are some that were clearly built in the 50s and 60s. They have pools, but it's still a courtyard. And from what it looks like to me as a Midwesterner, it looks like a hotel, like a side, Route 66 kind of motel, I guess, but really they're apartments. So one more thing that's related to this is that the film is shot in Los Angeles, and in 2001, I don't know, I guess it was shot in 2000. It's shades of the past, shades of Los Angeles's past. They don't show a lot of modern Los Angeles, maybe occasionally, but it's mostly old Los Angeles, old Hollywood. Aunt Ruth's apartment is Art Deco, and everything else. There's a 1950s kind of saturated colors throughout the film, and there are a lot of diners, and then the decrepit apartment building with the courtyard. There are two of them actually. One that where Betty lives in, and then later on there's an even older, more decrepit, dark apartment courtyard complex where she actually lives when she becomes Diane. When she's Diane, she's in that, and that is much darker. It doesn't have that lightness that the first one has. There's a very real contrast there. But the apartment itself, in the first time, both of them are not bad. Even the dark one looks like it's a pretty cool apartment. But the first one is actually really beautiful. Anyway, so that focus on Los Angeles as a place and a time that has never changed. Of course, this is, 24 years ago, so it probably has changed. We don't know what it was like in 2001, but he definitely seems to be establishing a feel for Los Angeles as being stuck in the 50s. And we know it's not, but it certainly is visually in the film. So
yeah, for sure. And I mean, to your point, I also feel like the longer part of the movie, it kind of has a vibe like it's taking place in the 50s or something. Like there are details that clearly there are details that clearly imply that it's actually modern day, but Betty's whole, I mean, just the fact that she's named Betty, like that's a very old-fashioned
not that Diane is any better though.
True.
Betty and Diane are both kind of old-fashioned
names. And that whole, I mean, the whole like grandparent people who usher her off the plane, that feels like a very old-fashioned kind of way of relating to people.
It's certainly in terms of an airport and a plane.
Yes,
it is certainly pre 9/11.
Yeah, I mean, this came out in 2001, right? So
so he was filming in 2000.
Yeah, it was technically made pre 9/11. My favorite scene in the film, and the one that I think is like really integral to understanding the film, is the Club Silencio scene, which is essentially the actual turning point, or the lead up to the turning point, I guess. It's kind of the last scene that belongs wholly to the first part of the movie. So after Betty and Rita sleep together, Rita wakes them both up by chanting Silencio no hay bando, which means there is no band. that wakes them both up, and Rita demands that they go to Club Silencio right then. So they get in a cab and they go to this place called Club Silencio. At this point, Rita's wearing the wig, so they both have short blonde hair and they look very similar and they're dressed pretty similarly. And they go to this club, and essentially what happens, this scene is my favorite because it totally worked on me the first time I saw it, and every time I rewatch it, it still kind of works on me, even though I know what's happening. And you know what's happening the first time, too, because literally what happens is you hear a trumpet playing, and then you see a man come out with a trumpet, but then he looks like he's playing, but then he moves it away from his mouth, and then an announcer tells you, there is no band, everything here is an illusion, this is not a live performance. And then Rebekah del Rio, which is the name of the actual performer, comes out and starts singing this Spanish language version of Crying by Roy Orbison, Llorando, and it's absolutely gorgeous. She has an incredible voice. Her performance is so moving, and when I say it works on me, what I mean is, while I was watching this the first time, yes, I know I'm watching a movie, but her lip syncing job is so good that I forgot that they tell you she's not singing live.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, obviously she's not singing live. Like, I didn't forget that I was watching a movie. Obviously she's not singing live if you're watching the movie, but like, I became so entranced by her performance that I forgot that she's not singing live in the movie. And I think that kind of happens to Rita and Betty as well. They are so clearly absorbed in her performance. They start crying. They're like, they're feeling every second of it. Yeah. And then in the middle of her high note, she collapses and the song continues. And you remember, this is not a live performance.
It's an illusion.
And that's just, it's been my favorite scene from the first time I watched that movie, because that was the moment where I was like, it's all an illusion.
It's a gorgeous part of the movie. And, and yet it totally doesn't fit. I mean, it's like the diner scene with the two mystery men. It's just kind of like he had this idea and he threw it in there. And yet it does fit. Yeah. Because they're both actresses. They both understand that it's illusion, and that the illusion, when you're acting in a movie, is to make people feel something. And this woman who's singing this song, the Roy Orbison song, one of his greatest, it's a very emotive song. And when you listen to it, if you listen to this song when you're going through a breakup, it's going to make you cry.
Yes.
So, and she does it, and as much as I love Roy Orbison, her version is better. It's just... It's so passionate. That's the thing. It's just so passionate. When Roy Orbison sings it, it's kind of, what's the word I want? It's very emotional. It's got a lot of pathos, but it's not necessarily passionate. And she is singing it like somebody is about to put a knife in her chest. I mean, it's that kind of passionate. And then she passes out. And you feel like, it's an illusion, but also it's almost like she passed out because she couldn't handle how passionate the interpretation of the song was. Yeah. And both of those work.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of a commentary on film itself. Like, a film is doing its job if you kind of forget that it's a film.
It suspends your disbelief, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And here he is reminding you that it's a film right at the climax of the movie of the song
and the movie.
Yeah. She collapses and he reminds you, this was filmed, all of this is an illusion, and that's beautiful. You are willfully partaking in an illusion, and that is what the art is.
You were pulled into this artistic interpretation of this beautiful song, and didn't that feel wonderful?
Part of the art of the piece is the audience's participation with it. Yes. And I did want to say, you said it feels like it was just a random idea he had. It kind of was and it kind of wasn't. I wanted to learn a little bit more about this, and basically he said he knew that he wanted there to be a song in the film at this point. So he knew that he wanted to have something like this scene, but he hadn't quite figured out what it was that he wanted, and a friend of his asked him to come and see this singer, and initially he thought that they both thought that he was maybe going to put her in Twin Peaks, but then he saw it, and so he basically went to see her perform, and they recorded her doing this song right then and there. They just she did the song and they just recorded it right then and there. And he went home and thought about it and realized that he wanted this in Mulholland Drive, and they used that recording. So the recording that is in the film is literally just
it's the first one he heard.
First time. Yeah, it's the first one he heard, and it was her first time recording it. She just sat down and went into the recording booth and just recorded it right on the spot, her first time meeting him, and that's what they used. And then he had her come in and do the lip sync. And he was just like so blown away by her ability to do the lip sync that he also sort of forgot that it was a lip sync. Because she sang it and she just redid her, her facial, she redid the performance basically for film, except without actually singing it.
Well, and it kind of reminded me when we were in the throes of listening to her, and you're sitting there with your jaw dropped, and the two women who are watching had the same expression, just this awestruck disbelief at how beautiful this is. Mm-hmm. It reminded me of the opera singer in The Fifth Element, because she's doing the same thing, and she's this kind of monstrous looking character. I mean, she's got snakes coming out of her head, but her singing is so incredibly beautiful, and everybody stops and listens to her and gets pulled into it. It's like you're a part of and you're a part of the music, because you're, like you said, you're participating in this because you're hearing it. She's singing it, but you're hearing it, and you're part of that experience. And in both movies, hers ends. She gets to finish it, but then she goes into that rock thing, so it's still kind of a sharp change. Yeah. And in this instance, the music continues, but the artist collapses. It's an incredible scene, and I don't mind it being in the middle of this movie. I think it fits perfectly, even though I couldn't tell you why. I couldn't explain. This is not a movie that is easy to explain.
Yeah. Yeah.
And linear thinkers would not like this. They would like the scene, and they'd say, well, what the fuck does it have to do with this movie? It has everything to do with this movie.
And it kind of is what triggers the end of the movie, because it's like while they're watching this that they pull the blue box out of the purse and decide to go home and open it. And that's also a pivotal scene. They go back to the apartment and they decide to open the box. Rita is about to open the box when she realizes that Betty has disappeared. Betty just disappears in the middle of the scene. And then Rita puts the odd-shaped key in the box, and as soon as she turns it, she also disappears. And then we get the final part of the film. And that seems to have been inspired by their experience at Club Silencio.
And it's a total change, too, because there is mystery leading up to this, and then there's the passionate love-making scene between the two of them. But mostly, it's been a kind of lighthearted tone up to this point. And even the scene, where the gangsters are obviously making threats against the filmmakers in this meeting, it's still kind of lighthearted and funny, and and for the most part, it's a very lighthearted film up to then. I described Betty's being Pollyanna-ish, and the whole film is like that. And this scene turns that the tone completely changes, which allows us to move into the darker part of the film.
When I was reading about Rebekah del Rio, I think they said that either she or her mother were actually the one who translated it into Spanish. So she's like singing kind of an original translation.
Wow. And I'd completely forgotten that she was singing it in Spanish.
Yeah, she's singing it in Spanish. I used to, in college, if I would just get in these moods while I was like working on papers, I would just pull up a YouTube video of this scene and just like play the song over and over again. I just loved it so much.
And the people over a certain age, nobody doesn't know this song. Even though it was a hit like in the late 50s, early 60s, I'm not really even sure. But everybody knows the song, and it probably been a lot of covers of it. So you know the words, even when she's singing it in Spanish, and I had forgotten that she sang it in Spanish. That's how perfect it is. But as she's singing it in Spanish, I'm hearing it in my head in English, and yet also hearing her fantastic interpretation of it.
Yeah, her performance of it sort of transcends the boundaries of language. You don't necessarily need to be hearing it in English to understand it.
No, you don't. Okay, so we're just about ready to go into hot takes, but I think I want to say a few things about the actors in the film. There are lots of recognizable actors. There are character actors and famous actors. Ann Miller, we've already talked about her. Lee Grant has a very small role here. We see her in basically one scene, and I'm trying to remember who she is, who she's playing. Maybe she lives in the apartment complex.
Is she the one who is sort of like the Cassandra woman?
Yes, she's kind of old and haggard looking. That's Lee
Yeah.
Grant. She's a very famous actress from her era. She's a very famous actress. And she's in it for a minute.
Louise
So-
Bonner. Yeah, I think she's like another resident in the apartment complex, and
Yeah,
she comes with like a vague dire warning.
that's right. That's right. And she's looks kind of like an old hag, basically.
Yeah.
She's
Yeah, her
kind of
hair's
got
kind of
dark.
crazy.
Chad Everett was a famous TV actor in the 70s and 80s. He was in a doctor role, and I can't think of what it is right now. Maybe you can look it up while I'm talking, but it was medical center, I think, in the 70s. Heartthrob. Huge actor. He just died a few years ago, but he's the actor when Betty goes in to do her audition.
Oh, that guy.
And it's very sexualized. And yeah,
Yeah.
he's older, but he's still very attractive, very sexy, tanned, handsome. And that's who he was in the 70s, only younger. It's Chad Everett. He was famous. There is nobody over the age of 50 who doesn't know who Chad Everett is.
I didn't exactly recognize him, but when I saw him, I was like, I've totally seen this guy and
You've
stuff.
seen him before. Yeah.
Yeah.
And since he stopped being a regular, he had 2 or 3 TV shows, and then after that he would do occasional cameos or small roles in movies. Whenever you needed an older, attractive man in the nursing home. That's
Yeah.
those are the kinds of roles he played. But anyway, so Chad Everett, and then of course there's Billy Ray Cyrus, and he does a good job. So it was a good choice, but an interesting choice. Then there were recognizable character actors, some of whom you would have recognized by name, and some that you would just know. Oh, I've seen him in a lot of things. So Dan Hedaya is one of the 2 mystery men in the meeting, the gangsters. Do you know who he is?
Oh, yeah, Nixon.
Oh, that's right.
I think he played Nixon in Dick.
Oh my God, I'd forgotten him. He's had a lot of weird comedy roles like that. Yeah.
I think he might also be the dad in Clueless.
Well,
I'm not
his
sure.
first role that I remember him from was Carla's husband in Cheers. It was such a weird character. He was just really kind of quirky. So he tends to play quirky roles, but then also serious, semi-serious roles, tongue-in-cheek serious roles, kind of things. He had a lot of roles like that, and he's still alive. Robert Forster was again a TV actor, not quite as famous or successful as Chad Everett, but he did quite a few shows. It seems like he was on Dallas or one of those kind of shows. I never watched him, so I don't know, but he's recognizable to a certain age, and he just died a few years ago. Then the 3 that I didn't recognize their names, but I recognized by seeing them were Michael Fairman, Wayne Grace, and James Karen. They all looked very familiar to me. So I've seen them in a lot of different TV shows or movies.
He was Richard Nixon in Dick.
He was Richard Danadaya. Oh my gosh, he's great.
Which I don't know if you've ever seen Dick, but it's like a sort of a parody movie about Deep Throat. It's
no, I should watch it. I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it in a long time. It came out in 1999, but I did really like it. I remember when I saw it. It's about these 2 teenage girls who are played by Michelle Williams and Kirsten Dunst, who are Deep Throat in this movie. Somehow they end up exposing Richard Nixon. I don't remember the whole plot, but it's like these 2 teenage girls in the 1970s who just sort of luck their way into exposing Richard Nixon, but they do eventually do it a bit more intentionally, basically because they find the tapes where he's abusing the dog, and so they decide that he needs to be brought down.
Yeah.
And every time I see this actor, I'm like, oh, it's Nixon.
And there you go. I'm going to have to see that. So did you have any other comments before we go into hot takes?
No, I think we covered it.
Okay. Well, I'll start with hot take number 1. Why does Justin Theroux have top billing in this movie in the credits? I do not understand. Yeah. He's not in it very long. He's not even an important character. They could have done away with him and it still would have been a good movie. So I don't understand. And actually, I'm wondering if the reason isn't because it was deliberate, because whoever produced the film or gave him the money said, no, you have to have a man in top billing.
It's possible. Although, I mean, every poster for the film has Naomi Watts on the cover. So, like, the promotion for the film made it clear that she was the main character. But yeah.
And we already talked about how Mr. Roke was in Twin Peaks, and Naomi Watts was actually in the 3rd season of Twin Peaks. You told me that. I didn't know it. We got to talk about the odd couple, the old odd couple at the beginning, the grandpa characters who were on the plane with her. Yeah. Just bizarre. And, you know, once you get past that intro scene where they say goodbye to each other and she gets in her cab and they get in their expensive 20-foot long limo, and then they're giggling and laughing the whole time. They just got these big smiles on their face and they never stop. They smile the entire 20 seconds that you're in the limo with them.
It's like a little uncanny because it's kind of cute, but it's also a little
It goes
creepy.
on so long that it's
like
it's
the smile
creepy.
is just a little too hard. Yeah.
And what are they smiling about? Did they pull something over on her? That, you know, have they stolen this limo? So I don't know.
And then they do show up in the final part.
Go ahead, you want to describe it because it's really perfect, I think. But
they show up when Diane is like in her room and she appears to be hallucinating a version of them, and they're like teeny tiny and running around.
And they come under the door. Really they slide it under the door.
And they come under the door, at
the very end.
But and they're like the size of like borrowers or fairies or something.
Yeah, like little fairies, And you know, he probably just thought it was funny, maybe not. But I think their presence there is a reminder to us, the viewers, of that first scene and how it was kind of normal but also kind of bizarre. And you know, Lynch does that a lot. Normal, bizarre, kind of being the same thing. The interweaving of normal and bizarre. And these two characters were that in the beginning of the scene. And it reminds us of who she was at the beginning of the film. The drastic change in who she has become. Because they remind us of the early part of the scene. I mean, there might be other reasons he threw them in there, but I was laughing. I mean, it was definitely comic relief.
Yeah.
Naomi Watts, oh my God, she can shudder like nobody's business. She shudders 3 times in this film. And I mean, it's just, her whole body shakes. And you look at it and it's like, what are you doing? She's just shuddering. And I don't know if he wanted her to do that. And I don't know. It was just really bizarre. But the final things for me are, well, Wikipedia describes this as a surrealist neo-noir mystery art film. And it does seem like he's going out of his way sometimes to make things feel surreal. The older couple in the limo, you know, arriving, and then they become little munchkins at the end, and then the man in the wheelchair separated from the world by what looks like a recording booth. I mean, there's all kinds of weird things he's kind of thrown into this, but I'm not sure I would call it surrealist. I do think my problem with it, the only problem I have is that I mean, I love a good mystery, but my linear brain really needs more proof. If some people are going to make this case that the first 90% of the film was a dream, I'm not sure I buy it. There is some blurred overlay in the flip, and actually it happens early in the film too, and I can't remember when, but there's some blurred overlay, like he's taken film from different scenes and overlaid them, and it's blurred, and that's when they flip into the last part of the movie. So maybe that's where he's saying it's a dream. I don't know. He says he's not going to say it's a dream, so I don't know. And things happening out of order, and you know that I kind of like that. That didn't bother me at all, even though I do like linear things. So the sound is also really bad in some parts of the film, and he's a sound designer, which is kind of wild because he designed and he made, so it must be deliberately bad. I guess that's pretty much all I have to say, except this is definitely his best film.
Yeah, I mean, it's my favorite of his, but I also, I mean, I am planning over the next few months to watch the films of his that I haven't yet seen, because I don't think I've actually seen enough of his films to say for sure what I think is his best film.
Oh, that's a good idea.
I did watch a short film by him that was really strange, and I don't think you would like it. But hot takes, I think it's kind of hard to have a hot take on this film because it defies hard opinions on it. But I guess my hot take would be that there are a number of YouTube videos and websites out there that are trying to explain every single little thing in the film, and I guess my hot take is I think they have missed the point.
Yes, you could take it apart that way.
You could, but why?
You're missing the point, though.
Yeah, I think interpreting the film is good, and coming up with, you know, things that it makes you think of, talking about it, that's all good. but trying to dissect it and cut it into these tiny little pieces and give a specific explanation for every single thing, I think you're kind of missing the forest for the trees there. Things do not need to have a specific explanation for them to exist and be good, there doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to turn out that the old people are actually aliens who kidnapped her and are forcing her to have this hallucination or whatever. Like you don't need that interpretation. It's just, they're there and maybe they mean something to you and maybe they don't. And, maybe the scene that means the most to you is the scene in the diner with the guy talking about his dream and then experiencing it, and it doesn't necessarily have to have anything else to do with the rest of the film. Take from it what means something from you and go with that. And if somebody else tries to tell you that your interpretation or your feeling about it is wrong, they have missed the point. Lynch literally said that he wants you to be a detective and figure it out for yourself. And that doesn't mean that you have to explain everything to a hyper-rational degree. It means the term that he used that I like is feel think, feel-think. Like they are both two sides of the coin of how to interpret this. It's not just about figuring out the specific explanations. It's about feeling what you feel and following that feeling. The end of the quote. That's another reason why people shouldn't be told too much, because knowing putrefies that experience. And he put knowing in quotation marks. This is not a film that you need to know. It is a film that you need to think about it, feel about it, and that's it. You don't have to have a specific explanation for what happened. Like I said, I kind of resist the explanation that the first part of the film is just a dream or is just a fantasy, and that the last part is the only part that's real.
If you need to interpret it that way, you can.
But I think that is not going to explain everything, and I think that's good.
Yeah.
Because it shouldn't be so linear and so exact, I mean, the way that I like to think of it is that both sides are sort of a commentary on the same thing. And I don't just mean commentary as a theoretical commentary, but also just as a way of getting us to, feel what we feel about these things. We are all familiar with this story of the young ingenue who goes to Hollywood, and it makes different people feel different things. For some people, it reminds them of being young and having these kind of crazy ambitions that maybe did or didn't happen. For some people, it's something that they still want to do, And maybe for some people, it's a reminder of how naive and silly some people can be. Who knows?
And how cruel and mean people can be, too.
Yeah, exactly. And it is kind of that duality of our hopeful desire for the future and also kind of the harsh reality of cruelty, and maybe something in between. How do we live with that cruelty juxtaposed with our ambition? How do we find a way out of cruelty? Anyway, so I guess that's it. I think those those websites that try to explain every single little detail, they're kind of missing the point, Just feel what you feel about the movie and let it be.
I agree. And I would ask people who, want to do that or don't understand it, were you entertained? Did you cry? Did you laugh? Then it worked for you. And it kind of reminds me, as you were talking, I was reminded of college when I took a lot of art history classes. I had enough that I could have minored in art history, and I love visual art. I love art. So, but the problem always was for me that the teachers would stand there and pick out every little piece of a painting and describe to you what it meant, what it was referencing, why it was important, how it worked in the bigger scheme. And by the time they were done, you were falling asleep. A painting that you had loved when they first put it up on the screen for you suddenly fell apart into these pieces that you were expected to remember for the test. Instead of just saying, look at how wonderful this is and here are a few reasons why it is, they would dissect it. And if you need to dissect this film, you're going to lose. It's not going to work.
Yeah. You lose the magic.
You lose the magic. And like you said, you could watch it, and I think I will watch it again. Every time you watch it, you're probably going to see something else in it that you didn't see the
Mm-hmm.
previous time and the time before that. And that's a great film. I can still watch Apocalypse Now, and I have seen it 20 times. I can still watch Jurassic Park. We've just talked about a few months ago. I can still watch that movie and see something new in it. And to me, that's the magic. If a film draws you back to it 3 or 4 times or 20 times, that's a good movie. And this is a movie that I wouldn't want to do it right away. I could see myself watching it again in another year, because it's that kind of movie. I really liked it, and I never expected. I've never been a big fan of David Lynch. I said that in the introduction, and I think this film made me a fan. And now I want to go back and watch the first season of Twin Peaks. So maybe we could talk about that in the future.
I do think that he in particular is a director where it is kind of best to watch his films more than once.
Yeah.
Because they are a little strange, and sometimes the first time you watch it, you just sort of have to deal with the strangeness.
Yeah.
So sometimes it takes a second or a third viewing to actually figure out what you enjoy about it.
Yeah, and I almost want to say they're deliberately strange, but as soon as those words are out of my mouth, I think, oh, but life is deliberately strange.
Yeah. And that is what he has said a couple of times.
It's kind of what he's showing us,
Yeah, his films are strange because life is strange. Life
is strange.
Defies explanation. Life does not always tell you exactly what it's about.
And would you have it any other way? Okay, well, that, dear listeners, is all for today. This has been Woman Inherits the Earth, a discussion podcast about women in movies from the perspective of a mother and daughter.
I'm Tessa Dare. You can find me at my website, tessadare.com, where you can sign up for my email list. Or you can follow me on Instagram and Threads at author.tess.adair. Or you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/womaninheritstheearth.
And I am Beth Von Baron. You can follow me on Instagram at STL_writer_Beth, on Blue Sky at STLwriterbeth.bsky.social, or you can sign up for my weekly Substack email, Saturday Morning Musings, at STLwriterbeth.substack.com. Thank you for listening. Please join us again in about 2 weeks.